Good day to you all, snow lovers. This is Ethan from the Sawtooth Avalanche Center with your weekend update for January 15th, 2021. This is a reminder, this does not replace the daily avalanche forecast, so be sure to check that out every morning or sign up to get it in your email inbox. Check sawtoothavalanche.com for more details. So we had a pretty eventful week. We'll start off by a little bit of a recap. Then we'll talk about the state of the snowpack as it sits right now and what kind of weather and storms we have on tap moving into the weekend and into next week. The week in a nutshell started off with a storm early in the week, Tuesday into Wednesday. That prompted an avalanche warning on Wednesday. The storm started to peter out, at least precipitation wise, midday on Wednesday, but the wind just kept on ripping even when the precip ended from the west, northwest, and north. And that extreme wind caused some intense wind loading, both in the alpine especially, but also at kind of all elevations through the day Wednesday and into Thursday. And we've seen a widespread natural avalanche cycle throughout many of our mountainous regions in the forecast area. And we'll review some of those major slides here in a second. The snow totals from that storm, the Tuesday into Wednesday storm, kind of want you to focus on the snow water equivalent column, which essentially, if you imagine taking a bucket, sitting it outside during a snowstorm and letting it snow into the bucket, bringing it in, letting it melt, and then measuring the inches of water that are in the bucket. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about snow water equivalent. So the higher the number here, the deeper that water in your bucket would be, and the more precip fell in that region. So Banner Summit had over an inch of water. Dollarhide, which is along the Smoky Mountain crest west of Ketchum, kind of had about an inch. Down in the Soldiers, they were also getting around an inch. While around the Wood River Valley, we really didn't see much. You can see the ranger station in Ketchum here, or in Sun Valley, or near Sun Valley, is just under a half inch. And up at Baldy, we were just over a half inch. So really it favored the western mountains, what we call the western and northern mountains. So the western Smokies, and out in this region, the Sawtooth Crest and Banner Summit. And then, of course, a little bit of extra down here in the Soldiers, but where we kind of left things out and drier conditions kind of persisted was right around the Wood River Valley here. So moving on, we have a map here of our avalanche activity. And avalanche activity, of course, this is just observed avalanches. This doesn't mean that avalanches didn't occur elsewhere, but these are the ones that we've been out in the field or people have reported to us. And just in the last few days, we have over 70 entries in our avalanche occurrence database. And it's pretty remarkable, and it's obviously it's nowhere near the total amount of avalanches that occurred during that last storm. You can check these sorts of images out on your own if you pull up our website, go to observations, and then let me show it to you here. If I can bring this up. You go to sawtoothavalanche.com, go to observations, and then go down to view avalanches. That's going to bring you to either a map where you can see all these avalanches and where we've been reporting them, or you can get it in a kind of a list view, whichever you prefer. If you go onto that database there, you can then go in, find the ones you're interested in, click on it, and it'll bring up a page that'll give you some more photos of those slides and a little bit of their details like aspect, start zone, elevation, and size, and so forth. So be sure to check that out. Like I mentioned, we had extreme wind following our heavy snow on Tuesday night into Wednesday, and that lasted for the last 2 days. I'll just run through some slides here, or pictures of slides of slides. This picture right here is looking south from Galena Summit down into the Smoky Mountains. This is what we call Weather Station Peak. Our upper Titus weather station is right here. This is Titus Peak off in the distance. And all these arrows are where there are crowns. We zoom in a little bit onto Titus Peak. You can see there's crowns up here, crowns over here, crowns down here. Pretty much all the way across this face. There's a crown that runs up this whole section right here. There's a crown coming under these rocks and all the way over here. So really just widespread avalanching in the Titus region. This is the northwest face of Weather Station Peak. And this bowl went pretty much wall to wall. There's crowns all the way around here. And then there's a separate set of crowns that are on down over here that I didn't take a picture of. Looking into the headwaters of the Salmon River, which is just over Galena Summit on the Stanley Basin side. There's some beautiful persistent slab avalanches. See this one, upper one here that failed, and then another pocket that failed below it. Looking over into the Boulder Mountains, this is near Galena Peak, right kind of to the north of Galena Peak. If you're familiar with Senate or Cabin Peak, this is in that area. Kind of a wider angle here, and then zoom in on the crown. You can see that this was a pretty heavily wind-loaded pocket, and it ran quite some distance all the way into the valley bottom and even poured over a little further. Just a cluster of persistent slab avalanches here. This is in Anderson Creek, which is behind the Boulder Yurt, kind of in the central Smokies. But as you're driving north toward Galena Lodge, it would be on your left. Just pretty impressive slides here. This is looking a little bit further up that same drainage. Some of the debris from those, the photo I just showed is peeking into the bottom here. We're just looking further up into Anderson Creek, and you can just see pretty much that entire basin had avalanches throughout. More persistent slab avalanches in the western Smokies. This is near Baker Creek. So this is actually one of the arms of Baker Peak, kind of a north-facing component of Baker Peak, and just crowns all the way across. You can see how thick the slab gets kind of over here in this section, from being heavily wind-loaded near the ridge line. A big wind slab pocket again up on Baker Peak here. Wind loading from the west and northwest that I was mentioning earlier and showed you that photo just came pouring over the top of this, loaded up this big pillow, which looks like it broke, and then broke a wind slab below it as well. So one of the patterns we've been seeing is that really there's avalanches both in wind affected terrain and non-wind affected terrain. You know, this here obviously has a little bit of wind effect, you can tell from this little pillow, but really not that much, nothing compared to that big wind slab in the previous photo. But we're still seeing instabilities down in middle elevation terrain, failing on those weak faceted layers that were buried in mid-December. As you drive out Baker Creek, you pass under this pretty large path on your left as you're headed out Baker Creek. Another just crowns all the way across, debris extending down into near the flats. This is a big wind-loaded pocket behind Butterfield, which is just off of the road, kind of by the Baker Creek parking lot. One of the first mountains you encounter as you're headed out Baker Creek. So all of those photos were anywhere between Baker Creek up to Titus, which is just at Galena Summit proper, essentially, and a couple across the road in the boulders. Now we'll jump up into the Sawtooths. This very large avalanche occurred on McGowan Peak in the Sawtooths. You can see just this fat crown down here. There's a crown up here as well. And it's just thick here from spindrift, just kind of, in fact, I think it's actually actively being loaded right now from spindrift, just getting blown down these rocks and filling in this big pillow here. Again, these are all avalanches that occurred during that storm Tuesday night into Wednesday, and some of which failed with wind loading Wednesday and Thursday. Another large avalanche near the Hell Roaring drainage in the Sawtooth Mountains. You can see the crown extending all the way up here and all the way down this ridge, and then way down here as well. Pretty impressive. Some of the wider, larger avalanches that we observed during this cycle were, so far at least, certainly in the Sawtooth Mountains. Here's another example of that on Cabin Peak. Again, a crown extending the majority of the way across this entire mountain. Here's another one in the northern Sawtooths, almost 1,000 feet wide, several feet thick in these locations of that crown here. Further north, working our way into Banner. Generally, so far at least in our observations, there's been less large avalanches, at least that we've noted so far. But this is an interesting one that Chris took a picture of. You can see the crown kind of coming up through here. Part of the reason why it's interesting is because this particular path actually is already avalanched once this season. Subsequent snowfall kind of reloaded it, and then it failed again in this last storm, which is something that we might be seeing happen, which makes things a little bit more complex out there. Here's a small wind slab that Ben was able to kick off down in the Smokies just yesterday. So when we're talking about some considerations with our snowpack right now, we have weak snow at the ground, and it's present in all of our forecast zones across the board. Really, something that varies across the board, though, is the slab thickness above those weak layers. And that directly influences your likelihood of triggering avalanches, as well as the consequences. So in areas where the snowpack or the slab overlying those weak layers is a little bit thinner, you might be more likely to trigger an avalanche on those layers. And it might be a little bit harder where it's thicker, but as you can imagine, where the slab is thicker, the consequences of triggering those slides are larger, because the slide that's triggered will be larger and more destructive. We also need to keep in mind that we just will have a lasting potential for human triggered avalanches. As we saw following our last two storms, we had human triggered avalanches for days, even a week out from our last loading events. And there's really no reason to expect anything different after putting a good dose of weight and water on it earlier this week. This image right here shows snow depths across the region. So we're up to 50-inch snowpack kind of around Banner Summit. You can kind of extend some of those. Generally speaking, you can kind of say that the deeper portions of our snowpack are the west side of the Smokies, the western Smokies, like this, and maybe a little bit down into here, kind of by the soldiers. And our shallower areas are going to be the areas around the Wood River Valley. We just don't have as much snow. So when we're talking about higher consequence, lower likelihood, kind of moving towards a deeper problem that's harder to trigger, we're talking about especially up in the Banner Summit area. But as we look ahead, we're going to be talking a little bit more about that, I would assume, coming up in the deeper portions of the west side of the Sawtooths, and potentially kind of in the Soldiers or north of the Soldiers, while the snowpack is really a lot thinner kind of around the Wood River Valley, and human triggering is still a lot more likely, but the avalanches are smaller. Kind of giving you a picture of what that looks like. We can look at just some pictures of what that slab over the weak layer looks like across the zone. So we have the Wood River Valley here, where we have about a foot of snow over the top of these weak facets, and this is prior to the last storm, so you might add a little bit of snow on top of that, but not much around here. Near Galena Summit, we've got 1.5 to 2 feet above that weak layer of facets. And as we move north into the Banner Summit zone, again, this was prior to the last storm. We had almost 3 feet of snow over the top of that layer. And it just got buried even more deeply with this last storm. Moving into a little bit of a weather forecast. We have a small storm that's moved in. It's gotten cloudy throughout the day today. We might get an inch, maybe an inch or two out of this storm. We'll have clear skies, sunny weather again tomorrow. Should be a beautiful day. Before a small storm comes in on Sunday afternoon. Again, that's just going to be a little guy bringing in 1 to 2 inches of snow. And then we kind of dry out again early next week as we wait for another decent storm Wednesday, looking into Friday. Let me pull up some other weather for you here. You can see the satellite right now. We've got a giant low pressure system over the Midwest. It's probably nuking snow somewhere along the Great Lakes right now, is my guess. Looks pretty cool. But in our neck of the woods, we have just this little wave of weather kind of coming in on northwest flow. You can see those clouds that have kind of crept into our area here in south central Idaho this afternoon. If you look at the jet stream, so this is way up in the atmosphere, and the brighter colors are stronger wind speeds. So essentially what you're looking at right here is the jet stream, the general track, storm track. And if you tick that forward a few days ahead, you can see that by Sunday, it's almost impossible to tell, but there's a little wiggle in the jet stream here, and that's going to bring us a little bit of snow. But later on in the week, we get this guy right here, this little trough that starts to approach. Again, here's Idaho right here. This little trough starts to approach kind of Wednesday night into Thursday, and could bring us a little bit of snow through the later half of the week. Another way to look at that, here's a weather model for up around Titus. You can see that today, Friday, we've got a little blip of snow. As this gray line bumps up, that's with added snowfall. So we've got a little bit of snow that arrives right here. This evening, a little bit of snow that arrives right here. This is still only about 2 inches total between these two storms, according to this model. And then we have a little bit of snow that arrives Wednesday coming into Friday, and that bumps us up to, maybe 6 or 8 inches. Again, though, much more than 3 days out, these models kind of break down a lot. So take this storm and its timing with a grain of salt, but it's looking like not a lot of snow coming up anytime soon, at least not until mid to late next week. All right, just a reminder, a lot of the videos and media that we're putting up goes straight to our Instagram page. So if you don't follow that, I'd suggest you guys do. Some of these videos, most of the videos we link to in the forecast, but if you miss them there, you can always catch them here. And we're trying to post as much stuff as we can, including these weekend updates, to our social media. So let us know what you think. Let us know what you want to see more of. Leave us a comment. Tell us what we're doing right and what you'd like to see more of, and we'll be sure to try to get it out there. Let us know what you're seeing out there, especially if you see or trigger any avalanches. And don't forget to check the full forecast each morning at sawtoothavalanche.com. Enjoy your weekend, and we'll see you next week.